So our major questions for this week are: how do artists tell stories? What stories do they tell, and why? And who gets to tell them? That is to say, who gets to be an artist, and under what conditions, and what skills and abilities do you need to have to work according to certain conventions. We ended last lecture by talking a bit about how artists purposefully rejected the language of history painting and the representation of heroic figures in order to tell other kinds of stories and to make other kinds of memorials. Today we're going to delve a little bit deeper into the awareness of how the conventions of history painting provided a platform for artists to question the academic tradition of painting, to question the terms of history and its relationship to contemporary life, and to question mainstream notions of appropriate subject matter for ambitious painting. So to do that, we're going to go into depth a little bit on one painting in particular, and it's a great one. It's Edouard Manet's Bar at the Folies Bergère from 1882. This is a good-sized painting, but it's certainly not anywhere as large as something like David's intervention of the Sabine women. It does use the same convention of a female figure facing forward, facing the audience, although she seems to be a bit more betwixt and between going into action. Here she seems to be about to serve someone a drink at the Café Concert, one of the big music and dance halls in Paris in the 19th century. And she also seems a little bit withdrawn into herself as well, sort of thinking about things on her own. It's a really complicated painting in the way it's organized. If you look in the foreground plane, you see mostly a kind of organization of still life objects, and it's no accident. Manet spent a lot of time looking at 17th century Dutch still life, and he would have had images like the one that we showed earlier by Klaus Heyde in his mind as he was organizing the front of this picture plane. He's putting still life first, and still life in terms of the hierarchy of genres in painting of what is the most important was sort of, as you'll recall, at the bottom of the hierarchy with history painting at the top. Then your eye moves up and you encounter the woman barmaid who is waiting for the next customer, it seems. And then you look into the background and you see a magnificent mirror in which the attendees and participants at the Café Concert are arranged in balconies, and as you look to the side, you see that in fact the barmaid's reflection seems like she's leaning slightly forward to attend to a male customer that is coming in from the upper corner of the frame. This painting is built around an interplay between what you see in front of you and what you see reflected from supposedly behind you, and that's the illusion that's put on display. It's also a painting that is insistently in the contemporary moment. We're not gesturing towards the ancient past or mythology. We are supposedly in 1882 in Paris, and that's really purposeful on Manet's part. Manet is making an argument in this painting that the painting of everyday life, the painting of contemporary life, the painting of modern life is essential to our understanding of the contemporary moment, and it can be as equally ambitious and as equally powerful as the tradition of history painting that he very well knew as a French painter in the 19th century. In this, he's finding common cause with a group of painters around him, painters and poets as well. And their manifesto, if you will, was a text by the poet and art critic Charles Baudelaire, who wrote an essay called The Painter of Modern Life and made a great argument for the primary duty of painters in the mid-19th century as being to paint their contemporary context, to paint the factual representation of modern life and not to be painting from mythology or from the ancient past. The painting's illusion sets up another interesting question, and it's a question that was crucial to understanding of 19th century public life, and that is to say, what is this woman selling? And there's been a lot written about this painting in that regard. So in order to get at that question, it's important to understand that this is a working woman. This is a woman who has to find her own daily bread and is doing so by being a barmaid. Middle-class women did not work properly speaking in the 19th century for the most part, and they largely also didn't appear in public as unescorted. They would be with their husband, they would be with their fathers or brothers, or with, at least with other women. So here is a woman on her own. And the other thing that people would have known in the 19th century is that it was really tough for a woman on her own to make a living. The cost of living in Paris was high, just like modern cities today in a lot of ways, and the wages paid to people who worked in the service industry were low. And so oftentimes women who had to work to support themselves resorted to prostitution on the after hours, had to find other ways to cover their costs. And so there's a question about contemporary life set up in this painting in a very sly and a very deliberately ambiguous way. Here is a woman who is facing her male customer. What is for sale? Is it the bottles of champagne and oranges and liqueurs that are arranged on the marble table in front of her, or is it her own body that the male customer might be negotiating for? So interestingly, by the mid-19th century, the painting of the heroic male nude signaled the ambitions of history painting, at the same time that the painting of everyday women signaled the ambition to address contemporaneity, to address modern life in its current form. And those two things were seen in opposition to each other. So that when we look at another beautiful painting by Edouard Manet, this one called Plum Brandy from around 1878, we can see Manet taking on that theme persistently, precisely to signal his allegiance to the terms of contemporary painting and the terms of contemporary life. That means everyday life in its most unremarkable forms. Again, not scenes of urgency or heroicism, but scenes of kind of contemplation, or actually nothing in particular happening. I love this painting because it seems to me a kind of pendant in a way to the bar at the Folies Bergère. This woman is on her own in public. She's stopped at the end of her workday to have a plum sort of coated with liqueur, which was a kind of not too expensive thing that a working class woman could treat herself to in the 19th century in Paris. She's also smoking a cigarette. And you have again that rehearsal of the relationship between something like a still life in the foreground, the glass of plum brandy on that marble-topped table, just like the sort of marble-topped counter in the bar of at the Folies Bergère. But this time there's no kind of illusionistic is she or isn't she, no kind of play of indeterminacy about what she is. She's a woman at rest, a woman who earned her rest clearly and has taken that moment in public. Because the subject matter is so everyday and is so unremarkable. It's the work of painting that comes more and more into view, and as opposed to the kind of smooth surfaces that characterized history painting in the hands of David 50 years earlier, for example, 50 to 75 years earlier. Here you see a much more rougher and more expressive handling of paint. Just look at the thickness of the handling of paint in the simple decoration that's on her hat, the beautiful attention to the hand holding the cigarette. These kinds of optical interrogations of everyday life, how an artist sees the world around him and how he represents it in his own particular manner, become the calling cards of ambitious painting as a kind of split between the academic tradition and what gets called an avant-garde tradition begins to widen in the 19th century. So now we're going to leap 100 years ahead to say that by the 1970s, those traditions of representing everyday life and representing everyday life primarily as women's work and primarily as a function of oftentimes male artists working out the terms of their own individual handling of paint and their own distinctive style on a platform of representations of domestic life, of women engaged in domestic activities, and private life has hardened sufficiently to again be something something to be interrogated and something to react against in very pointed ways. So we're looking at a work from a series of so-called film stills that Cindy Sherman did in the late 1970s, and this one dated from around 1977. They're all untitled. They're photographs, and they're photographs that are set up and staged. That's Cindy Sherman, the artist herself, who is turning the camera on herself as she enacts a series of personas that seem like they might be drawn from narrative films. So there's that, again, that gesture to storytelling. But at the same time, you don't precisely know what film they're drawn from. So you have this sense of a relationship to film, but no tracking back to an exact film. She's in a kitchen interior. It's a very contemporary kitchen interior. And in the 1970s, you can see the Morton salt container in the foreground, the Joy dishwashing detergent in the background. And there's some kind of droll gesture to that is she or isn't she question that was a part of the bar at the Folies Bergère as well. She seems to be cooking and she seems to be posing at the same time. She's in kind of everyday housewife attire with the apron, but she also has a little bit of a come hither posture. So it is riffing, the photograph is riffing on all those questions that were set up by the bar at the Folies Bergère, but this time the questions are in the hands of a woman artist using her own body as a performative vehicle for storytelling. And here she is again out on the streets. The woman in the streets, just as we saw sort of in a different way in the woman at the bar in Plum Brandy. She is taken on a bit of a different persona, sort of the young working woman come to the big city for the first time. Again, you feel like you are in a narrative context, but you're not quite sure what might have come just before this particular film still or what might have come afterwards. And again, we're in a story in which we are seeing a rehearsal of a kind of conventionalized story of everyday life in the big city. The young woman come to start a new career or go to work. And at the same time, it's being taken apart as a matter of a performative and artificial self-representation, a kind of representation as masquerade that calls into question the role of women in art as something only to be looked at and never as doers and makers. We're going to end with that question with another work from the 1970s by another American woman artist, Martha Rosler, and it's a great video performance piece, and I think you should be able to get a link to it and look at the whole thing, although we're just going to see a little bit of it here now. It's Martha Rosler herself, the artist, that we're looking at again. She's again in a very unremarkable kitchen interior. This particular work, as opposed to the film stills, is not gesturing to cinema and to film, but to television, and in particular, I think, to some of the cooking shows that were so popular in the 1970s. So Martha Rosler is facing the audience again, like the barmaid at the Folies Bergère in Manet's painting. She should be a happy housewife, but as you proceed through the video, you see that as a performing body, she's spelling out the alphabet using culinary utensils, and sometimes in kind of menacing ways as well. And that sets up a sort of set of questions about the performative eloquence of the human body that's not the heroic male nude, but this time the sort of everyday unremarkable housewife. At the same time that the everyday unremarkable housewife is not passive and simply an object available to be seen, but active, gesturing meaningfully and evenly and even aggressively at the camera. And by the end of the video, she is actually almost in kind of semaphore fashion, spelling out the letters of, the final letters of the alphabet, X, Y, and Z, with her own body. Again, putting a question forward to us about what kinds of bodies tell stories, what kinds of bodies can be eloquent in a textual and signifying way, And who owns the terms of representation? Is the woman, pictured woman, a passive object to be represented, or is she a maker of representations and very polemical representations in her own right?